Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here at VC Andrews, and well, yeah, you know how it goes. You asked me to react to this, and this time we got the top 10 episodes of Disney's Amphibia. Yeah, kind of like the Owl House, but with frogs. I think I actually reminded him of this, and best way I can describe it, okay? You'll understand what I mean in a minute, but anywho, let's check it out. Got an hour on this, so yeah, we're gonna be here for a while. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Hey guys, it's the VC Inch Critiquer. Notice anything different about me?
Ouch.
Ha ha ha. But yes, I've done the standard processing cleanse for 21 days and lost over 13 pounds. And tried to implement more healthier changes into my lifestyle, like eating snap peas more regularly. And I can't really go into the details with this, but some of my family has found that stepping out of their comfort zone for a little getaway has really helped their emotional well-being. Yeah, I've been finding a lot of examples in my life of how change can be pretty scary at first, but if you give it a chance, it can often be pretty damn awesome. And with all these constant examples in my life of how
change is good, change is good, change is good.
Okay,
Hey,
don't push it. I think now is actually a very fitting time to review a certain frog-themed Disney work with Keith David as the villain.
No.
No, not that one.
That is good, though.
Yep, for my very first top 10 video since Owl House, I'm going to be reviewing what I like to think of as Owl House's frog-themed twin sister, and her name happens to be
Evangeline.
No. Her
Try
name
again.
actually happens to be Amphibia.
There you go.
It's about a 16-year-old girl named Anne Boonjoy. Oh wait, sorry, she's actually 13. She just happens to have a growth disorder that makes her look way older than our two BFFs, Sasha and Marcy, share. Speaking of which, while the three are indeed very close, it's not what you would call the most healthy friendship. Sasha's a self-centered rebellious punk who frequently talks Anne to skipping school, vandalizing, and playing harmful pranks that almost always end with Anne getting the full blame and punishment. And Marcy may be bright and delightfully adorable, but also very impulsive and not the most forward-thinking, and Anne's attempts to keep her out of trouble are also usually at her own expense. Well, on Anne's 13th birthday, Sasha and Marcy peer pressure Anne into shoplifting a priceless frog-themed music box from a pawn shop, and upon opening it, the trio are separately transported to a world called the Boiling Island. Sorry, I mean Amphibia. A world that, big shock, is populated by anthropomorphic amphibious creatures like toads, frogs, and newts. After discovering she's not the cold-blooded monster they thought, a family of farmers called the Planters, consisting of the stern but loving Hoppadiah, aka Hop Pop, the feisty but witty Pollywog Polly, and 10-year-old slightly irresponsible and foolhardy but undyingly loyal Sprig, agree to let Anne crash at their place until the mountains clear in 2 months, and then they can find a way to locate her friends and get them all home. So during that time, Sprig volunteers to be Anne's temporary BFF until she finds Sasha and Marcy again, and she's cool with that. So after 2 months, or more accurately 1 season, of largely generic and cliched kids show plots, more on that in a bit, the mountains finally clear and the family sets out to the Emerald City, Newtopia, to see if the Wizard of Oz, King Andreas, can help her get home. And in the process, Anne reunites with Sasha and Marcy, and sure enough, the good-hearted King Andreas assures them that he can help them get home once the music box is fully recharged. But Anne finds that not all her friends have been as truthful or loyal as she thought. So just to clarify, Season 1 isn't bad, it's just kind of underwhelming compared to Seasons 2 and 3. The writing feels a lot more geared just towards kids than both kids and adults, and with the exception of the pilots and a few episodes here and there, most notably that feature Anne's friend Sasha, it pretty much has nothing to do with the main story of Anne trying to find her way home. Just to clarify, all that exposition with Anne and her friends that I mentioned earlier isn't revealed at the beginning. The pilot just opens with Anne and Amphibia, and all we learn initially is that she's there because she shoplifted that music box. The details about her friends are revealed towards the end of Season 1 and throughout most of Season 2, but for the most part, Season 1 mostly opts to just be a generic 90s kids show complete with all the cliches common at the time. You name it. Glory isn't worth the misery of your friends, appreciate your loved ones for who they are, own your mistakes, be wary of creepy motels out in the middle of nowhere, you name it. Hell, there's not even that many episodes that focus on the show's main message. Apparently this was because Disney wanted to see if the show could find an audience before they got into the deep emotional story, and while I tolerated the first season enough to watch it in its entirety, I honestly was like, finally! when the big emotional story I was promised finally got started. And it does at the very end of season 1. And from then on, we get a fun, engaging, and emotional story written a lot more for both kids and adults like Disney should be, with a pretty mature message coming from a Disney frog. Again, not those Disney frogs.
If you liked it, then you should have put some green on it. Ho, 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 ho.
Really?
Does that even count?
Change can be difficult,
There you
but
go.
it's how we grow.
Thank you. And
There we
just as a
go.
quick heads up, I'm going to go into most of the major spoilers for this show, because if I did this countdown without spoilers, there'd be almost nothing to talk about, I'm afraid.
True.
So let's see which episodes display this message best, while also giving the best humor, drama, and heart. These are the top 10 episodes of Disney's Amphibia.
Nope. Get this thing started. First up, number 10.
Number 10. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I did want to find at least one episode of season 1 to put on this list, and if I absolutely had to, it would definitely be this one. Yes, the premise is as cliched as the rest of the season, namely that the planner's basement is flooded from a leak, and thus Anne needs a new place to sleep, which Sprig proposes be his own bedroom, despite Hop Pop having less than optimal experiences with being roommates with friends.
And they complain whenever you clean your web crusties out. Yes, I have to do it in our room. It has the best lighting.
The two brush
Yikes.
off his warning,
Bye.
and despite pretty fun startup pillow fights and would rather have this or that games, the two find that there may have actually been some truth to the elderly frog's warnings after all.
Yeah.
Only problem is, both are afraid that admitting this will mean they aren't true besties after all, or as they now put it,
Spread against the world!
and try to put up with it. So okay, this premise is absolutely nothing new. We've seen the whole two best friends sharing a room/house together and driving each other crazy premise too many times to count in media, but there are definitely some things about this episode that make it one of the best executions of that cliche yet.
Oh.
But before we get into that, I want to say that this episode is more than a little relatable to me, especially with the whole Anne feels hot and Sprig feels cold ordeal, which is almost the nail what my little brother and I were like growing up. No, we didn't share a bedroom, but we did share the same floor upstairs, which is almost as difficult, especially when the shower's right between your frickin' rooms, and he had to take his super early and take his sweet time when I was still trying to rest. Oh, but that's not even the worst of how I relate to the loud noise component. Right outside my bedroom was our big screen TV media room, so if my brother or sister, who weren't nearly as early sleepers as I was, had friends over, they'd usually turn that TV on full blast without the slightest regard for my beauty sleep whatsoever. As much as I love my folks to death, they were guilty of that a few times too. Whenever I did have to share a room with them, like on a vacation or road trip, there was the snoring of my brother and dad. Good God, the snoring! Well, I guess I should be grateful they never threw their wet tongues at me during the night. But okay, enough about me, but I think you all see now.
Yeah, I think you get the idea. Honestly, yeah, just because they're best friends doesn't always make them the great roommates. You know? Just say. Give it some time to be like, okay, let's just trial it and be like, and also, best to be honest when things go, things are a little off, because otherwise things are never going to get better. Probably will get worse.
Why this episode hit home so much for me. But another thing I really love about this episode is, whereas most depictions of this cliche have only one of the two parties being largely at fault for being a nuisance, usually the main character's best friend, in this episode, both Anne and Sprig feel more or less equally guilty of driving each other crazy. This helps keep both parties from being too unsympathetic, given they're both at fault here.
Yeah.
But what I love most about this episode is, not only does it give a great example of the show's message that we'll go into in a bit, but also really showcases the bonds that Anne and Sprig are developing. And even though it's clear they're both absolutely miserable being roommates after the first night, neither one will admit that because they're scared it'll mean that they're not good friends. It really is admirable that even though these two have only known each other for like 2 weeks at most by now, their friendship means a lot to them by this point, and they're willing to suffer for the sake of maintaining that. Hell, even when Anne causes Sprig's favorite action figure to break, Sprig doesn't even freak out about it. He just calmly heads down to the bathroom with quiet dignity and grace.
Where's that darn leak?
Quiet dignity and grace.
But the episode really displays the serious message and the importance of accepting change. Namely how even though you think you're being selfless and not being open with your loved ones about how you feel, you may find that that's only going to put even more strain on your relationship and drive you even further apart. But of course, when they think spraying against the world is over, when they finally open up with each other at the end, even after working together seamlessly to ward off some underwater predators in the basement's flood, Hot Pot finally spells things out for the kids.
Sharing a room doesn't make you friends. Being honest with each other does. In fact, if you ask me, you're better friends now than you were before.
Well, I can't really give the details of that. Let's just say that certain people in my life have learned this lesson to heart recently as well. Namely, that's important to share how you feel instead of just tucking it in and doing nothing about it. Despite my overall meh opinion towards season 1 of this show, this episode really was frickin' awesome for doing a premise that was not only relatable to me, but in one of the best ways this premise has ever been done in media, and delivering its message about change, namely in this case the importance about being truthful with each other regarding your feelings, at quite a convenient time in my life. Hell, it even goes to the trouble to demonstrate the whole things won't be completely different scenario by showing that Sprig and Ann can still play their would you rather games in separate rooms after all, really going the extra mile to make sure there are no loose ends and...
Oh.
Didn't anyone fix the leak?
Right. Number 9.
Number 9.
Rope one?
Maddie and Marcy. This is a pretty interesting one in
There's
that
Marcy.
none of the 4 leads have more than a couple second cameos in this episode, but I think Ann and Sprig put it best.
Do you ever think it's weird when the main characters aren't in an episode?
You don't miss them.
No, the
Oh,
2 leads in this
inaccurate.
episode are actually Ann's impulsive friend Marcy, and a character named Maddie, who's a creepy practitioner of witchcraft that was Sprig's arranged fiancé in season 1 in exchange for some dough they needed from her dad to bake a pizza for a contest. But ultimately they called it off, and she's mostly been a background character for the remainder of the series, with the exception of this
Maddie.
episode where she's the lead. So just to bring you up to speed as to what's happening,
Right.
Anna's been reunited with Sasha by now, but it wasn't
Yeah,
all rainbows
we'll
and
get there
sunshine, which I'll
later.
go more into with the next installment. But by now the planners have made it to Newtopia, where Marcy wound up, and they're
Hey.
currently in the process of charging the 3 stones to the music box per Andreas' instructions, but are currently taking a little breather after the hectic encounter with the first temple, which we'll go more into a bit
Yeah,
later
of
down
course.
the list. Okay, so now that you know what's going on in this series thus far, I'll fill you in on more details later. In this episode, we get a detailed look at Maddie's past, namely how she used to be a very supportive and attentive big sister to her tadpole triplet siblings, Ginger, Lavender, and Rosemary. But once she
what
took an
happened?
interest in black magic, her sisters became an afterthought to her at best, an unnecessary distraction to her precious magic at worst. Marcy, on the other hand, she quickly takes a liking to upon meeting her thanks to her shared weird persona and fondness for occultism, and takes Marcy in as her apprentice/good friend, which of course makes her sisters green with envy.
I have a lot of green friends who would find that offensive.
So,
Sorry,
Taylor
buddy.
commented how she wishes they'd grow up a bit too literally.
Uh-oh.
They concoct a growth potion from Maddie's magic book that just makes them bigger as opposed to older, and soon a little too big.
Oh,
to
God.
the point that they're in danger of exploding. So yeah, this is the first and only time the character of Maddie has actually been given an actual character beyond just being the one-dimensional weird occult voodoo frog. Yeah, I think
Makes
the
sense.
subplot in season 1 of she and Sprig being betrothed would be interesting, but they honestly did virtually nothing with it in that season. I honestly wish this character arc of Maddie remembering the importance of balancing work and family had been integrated much earlier and throughout the series, because, cliched or not, it fits brilliantly with the series' message on handling change, and with good execution, it honestly would have made Maddie a pretty interesting and relatable character. But even in 11 minutes, Maddie does have a pretty natural and strong character growth. We see her start out as honestly kind of an entitled bitch who makes it pretty clear that she cares more about her magic than her own sisters. Hell, she pretty much directly says it.
Don't you think you should still make time for them occasionally?
Nonsense. Being a witch is a big responsibility, Marcy. I've got more important things to do now than babysit.
Yeah, talk
Ouch.
about change resistant. But thankfully, once she realizes that her sisters are in danger of blowing up because of her, she almost immediately changes her tune, makes a very sincere apology to them, even begging them to chew her out for how she treated them. Of course they accept her apology, but that was still sweet on Maddie's part. You'd think that in 11 minutes this character development would seem very rushed and forced, but it actually feels very natural here somehow, maybe in part from Jill Bartlett's stellar performance as Maddie here. And in regards to the little sisters themselves, they're also really well performed. Unlike Polly, they were voiced by actual kids, and the girls they cast really give the trio a natural endearingness with their performances.
Night, girls.
Good night, Daddy.
So you really feel for them when their sister is blowing them off regularly, and just want to tell Maddie to stop being a little bitch to these adorable little cherubs. But I will say, even if it wasn't right for her to blow off her sisters because of her, I really wish the show did more with the bond between Maddie and Marcy, because these two really did seem like they had a great connection with each other. Dare I say, even better than she had with her actual besties Sasha and Ann. More on that a bit later, though. There's not too much about this episode comedy-wise, but it's got a couple pretty funny bits.
A really rotted corpse.
Hey, perfect. Did you girls just mistake me for a corpse?
Corpse, not Hot Pop.
What? See my spell book?
I think I saw your sisters with it.
I'm gonna kill him.
We'll make sure you resurrect them when you're done.
I also love this cute shout out to Winnie the Pooh
with the honey pot,
their growth potion.
Cute.
And is that the Book of the Dead Maddie's
Yeah,
reading?
Necronomicon next more. That's about right.
Maddie knew Ash Williams. Even if it was just a one-shot deal for Maddie in the spotlight, it was definitely utilized to most, albeit not all, of its potential. Not just showcasing the show's message and accepting change, but also proving how it is indeed true that you don't miss the main characters of a show in an episode if said episode is really that good.
Amen to that. Wait, number 8?
Number 8. Battle of the Bands. Much as I love the show's Twin Owl House, I feel one major thing it lacked was a big iconic musical number. Well, thankfully, Amphibia does not disappoint in that regard, giving an iconic song that I actually wrote my own cover of to cheer someone up I loved who was having difficulty with, well, something personal in their life. Okay, so let's talk more about Sasha. She ended up in the Toad, aka Brutish Rebel area of Amphibia when she arrived, and was thrown in the pokey until she connected with and befriended the corrupt Warden Grimes. No, not that one. Nor that one.
You wish.
There we go. Who have been feeling the cause of the frog's recent insubordination to Toads was from Hot Pop, so she conspired with him to lure Ann, the Planters, and the rest of Wartwood to a celebratory banquet in honor of Sasha and Ann's reunion, the plan being to imprison them and break the frog's spirit by finishing off the leader of the rebellion. She failed, of course, and Ann finally realized how manipulative and selfish her bestie actually was, and put her foot, or rather her sword, down with it. Sasha feels guilty and almost commits suicide, but ends up getting saved, and she and Grimes go into hiding for most of season 2. Yeah, it was a really good episode, just not what I consider one of the top 10 greats of the show. But her guilt did ultimately still get the best of her, and she reunites with and reconciles with Ann at the third and final temple to recharge the stones, promising to be a better person and friend here on out. Only catch is, it was, big shock, yet another manipulation strategy so she and Grimes could get to the king's throne and overthrow Andreas and take over Amphibia. But that's for a much higher ranked episode, and this episode is about the day before that, where, in order to boost the town's morale with all the crazy shit that's been going down these last few months, Mayor Toadstool decides to hold a music competition, which the girls see as an opportunity to put their music talents to good use. So besides the awesome song that the girls end up playing, which we'll discuss more about, one thing that makes this episode especially stand out is that it was a major step towards Sasha's redemption. I mean, her real one. So when Ann pitches a song she wrote about Amphibia called No Big Deal, Sasha, being her usual control freak self, overhauls Ann's song to almost something totally different, and she's unwilling to collaborate since she's always been the head honcho of their music. Hell, their band back home was literally called Sasha and the Sharps. In other words, she's not willing to accept change. But after finding that Ann and Marcy aren't as passive as they used to be, she goes to find a band member who's a bit more passive to perform with, namely the mayor's comedic little toady called well, Toady. But Sasha finds that having a subservient follower isn't as fun as she thought, especially compared to playing with her two BFFs, and decides that maybe a bit of change wouldn't be so awful after all, and humbles herself going along with their silly song that's not her own. Cliched, yes, but it was also a huge sign of Sasha genuinely moving in the right direction towards redemption, as this is the first time in the series we actually see her put others first and accept the fact that sometimes things can't always go her own way. Plus, their song, No Big Deal, not only slaps big time, but it's honestly a pretty sweet song about how, even in strange new places or just hard times in general,
I feel at home in a place that shouldn't be real. Crazy strange, but it's no big deal.
But great as the song is, it doesn't end up winning. Instead, Grimes' beautiful harp solo does, and even though she has every right to be pissed given how awesome their song was, Sasha actually doesn't mind because performing with her friends was more fun than winning some stupid trophy. That really made me smile. There's not too much more of this episode that stands out especially, but there are still a few fun visual gags with the other contestants' songs, and the fact that a cold-blooded rebel like Grimes has such a peaceful and angelic taste for music is pretty freaking funny. But honestly, this awesome song and big moment in Sasha's character development was more than enough to get it on this list, albeit at a low spot, and there's even a sweet moment where Anne says her goodbyes to everyone in Wartwood since she and her friends are going home tomorrow, not noticing Marcy's really odd look as she says this. And thanks them for all they did for her, which is really sweet given most of them have been pretty dickish to her up to now. But they do seem like they're genuinely gonna miss her and gladly agree to a final group selfie with her that night. With an awesome song, awesome character development, and a really heartwarming ending, this episode definitely hit all the right notes in proving that
it's no big deal. Finally me and it's no big deal.
Nice. Oh, bottom one. Number 7.
Day at the Aquarium. One of the hardest changes in life, as I'm sure you know, is saying goodbye to someone you love if it really is for the best. And that's the aspect of change this episode chooses to look at. So, backtracking to when Anne and the Planters are still visiting Utopia and learn from King Andreas that the stones need to be charged for the box to return Anne and her friends home, he reveals that they've already located one of the stone charging temples, they just need a week or so for preparations. But Hop Pop reveals that he and the kids need to get back to Wartwood now for the harvest season, and since Marcy points out that it wouldn't be practical to have Anne go back with them just to come right back to Utopia only a little later, even though the real reason is painfully obvious, she just doesn't want to be parted from Anne again, Anne and the Planters are determined to have one last fun day together at the aquarium, but have a bit of trouble finding activities that don't remind them of all their past sentimental wacky hijinks. Cliched? Yes indeed, and there honestly wasn't as much material to talk about with this episode, but come on, this setup is just perfect for a show with a primary message about accepting change. Plus, even if the primary strength of this episode, which is naturally the heart, is nailed here, you also can't help but giggle a bit at the actors' delightfully over-the-top sad performances here.
Grubhog! Zappapede! Veggie Robo! Who knew coral came in such variety?
For the record, Hop Pop is voiced by Goofy's actor Bill Farmer, and Anne is voiced by Brenda Song, who played London Tipton on Zack and Cody. Oh yeah, and is also comedian Macaulay Culkin's wife, so that would probably explain these great comedic performances here. But silly as they are, they actually don't distract from the emotional drama going on down here. Even though Anne's only known the Planters for like 3 months now, it's clear she has definitely come to consider them true family at this point, and vice versa, and they know this is more than likely going to be the very last time they'll ever see each other again, so you can see why they're all so broken up right now, and why all this nostalgia they can't evade is so painful for them.
It looks exactly like the water snake that almost ate me in spring!
I knew it! You two always disobeying and causing trouble.
That was the day I realized you weren't going to eat us.
No joke, even though I didn't think season 1 was really that great, all their devastation with all the callbacks they make to it are so dramatic, they almost softened my view towards that season a bit. No, I'm not kidding you. So are there any other strengths to this episode? Well, we do get a pretty good action scene here, where after Sprig provokes the sea creatures at the water show and they go feral, the Planters team up to whoop their asses and save Sprig, with a climax that probably would make Free Willy fans proud. But the great thing about this episode is, even though, big shock, Anne decides not to leave the Planters, this episode does still end up going through with its message about saying goodbye, just not in the way it was building up. After the planters and Anne have their supposed final heartfelt goodbye, and Marcy tries comforting her friend unsuccessfully, Marcy decides she has to be the one to let her friend go and tells Anne to go after her frog family. And you better believe she does.
Anne?
I'm coming with you to Portland.
Big Frog, I really didn't know how I was gonna make it without you.
Even though the show obviously couldn't go through with separating the planters and Anne forever at this point in the series, I love how it's still able to integrate its message with Marcy and have her experience true growth with her character for the first time in the series, where she realizes that her actions are having consequences, namely making her best friend heartbroken, and now is actually bothering to be considerate and lets her best friend go so that they'll be happy, making for a great way to top off this humorous yet extremely heartfelt episode about dealing with the difficult change of when it's finally time to
Let it go, let it go.
But I mean, I guess Marcy realized it was only fair since she'd only be away from Anne from a short while. Not really sure why Andreas felt the need to make a mysterious proposition to her. I mean, it's not like Anne and Marcy are the ones who will never see each other again once it's time to go back to Earth. That's Anne the Planters, so I mean, it wasn't a huge sacrifice letting her go after them. Wasn't it?
You know where this goes. Christmas time.
Number 6. Froggy Little Christmas. Another big thing that I felt Owl House lacked was a Christmas special, which once again, its twin manages to deliver on. Speaking of twins, season 3 of both shows is definitely when both twins' shared traits are most evident, namely when, at the end of the prior season, the mean girl gets back home, but her friends from that world are sent back with her and are now stuck in her world, and the first part of season 3 is them staying with said girl and her family while they try to find a way back to their world now, while also experiencing the culture shock with human life. And for the record, the similarities don't end there, which we'll go more into with the finale. Later. By the way, if you're wondering about Sasha and Marcy, they're still in Amphibia.
Yeah.
But on the plus side with Amphibia is, since its season 3 consisted of more than just 3 45-minute specials, this season has a lot more time to explore the whole fish out of water in the human world aspect, and had some great ideas for such. But my personal favorite one is when the planters learn about Christmas for the first time. Okay, so yes, Anne's home and back with her parents, which I gotta say is kinda new for my channel. The last several shows that I've reviewed about adolescent girls in fantasy worlds have all had single moms. This is the first time said girl has had both parents together and in action. And despite their initial and understandable shock about the situation and brief phase of unhealthy overprotectiveness when Anne first got home, they quickly recovered from and apologized for said paranoia, think of the planners as family now, and for the first time ever are offered to spawn the annual Christmas float parade for their restaurant Tai Go, their longtime dream since they came to America. But Mrs. Boone Choi decides it's too risky given both King Andreas and the government are after them. Oh yeah, King Andreas turns out to have been a villain who actually wanted the music box recharged so he could conquer the multiverse. More on that later. Yeah, he's the villain voiced by Keith David I mentioned earlier. But seeing how her mom is clearly heartbroken about having to forfeit her longtime dream, Anne pretty much says screw it and works with the planters to build her mom the best Christmas float in history with the help of the quirky historian Dr. Jan, who's helping them research a way for the planners to get home, and these 2 lesbian technicians Polly met online. But it turns out maybe she should have erred on the side of caution after all. Oops. Whoa, that was a lot of exposition. But anyway, the message of this episode isn't really about change per se, it's more about the importance of giving or even making sacrifices for those you love this time of year. I mean, figure Anne's mom would sacrifice her shot at being in the parade of her dreams for her daughter's safety. What parent wouldn't? But the fact that we later learn that she and her husband have actually had a relatively hard time fitting in with American culture since they moved from Bangladesh, and she still turned down that bit of good fortune she finally got offered, definitely makes it all the much more sweet. But I really have to give kudos to Anne. I mean, it's not often we see a kid willing to risk her safety or potentially her own life just to make her mom happy, especially in today's age where the majority of kids just seem to be
scandalizing, vandalizing punks.
Okay, not all, but my
Yeah, but, I mean, we've seen Sasha, who was literally graffitiing in, pranks and all. Sheesh. I mean, you get it, but god dang. Woohoo. Sorry. Cough. Anywho, moving along.
My best friend can vouch as a gym teacher who works with kids regularly that a lot of today's kids are not as well behaved or considerate as we were.
Nope.
But not Anne. She's not willing to let her parents make yet another sacrifice with all they've made for her so far. Now it's her turn to make a selfless one for them and make the best Thai float of all Thai floats. I also really gotta give Dr. Jan credit in that she's willing to let Anne take literally anything from her museum for the float, even though she's only known her for a short while. That's pretty sweet. But it turns out that Anne's not the only one trying to give an awesome Christmas gift. Once the players get some basic idea of what Christmas is, Sprig figures he's gotta get the perfect gift for Anne or he'll completely ruin Christmas.
Oh no.
And the scenes of him trying to find this are pretty freaking funny.
Garbage! It's all garbage!
He's right.
But you still can't help but go,
Harsh, but
aww, for all
accurate.
the trouble he's willing to go for his best friend in this human holiday he's just learned about. But it's not just the characters who are willing to give generous and selfless sacrifices for the holiday here. Believe it or not, it's also the crew. Rebecca Black, who's Jewish, actually writes a really sweet and heartfelt Christmas song for the background.
The holidays are here, and with them come the tidings of this special time of year.
But on the subject of religion, one nitpick I have with this episode is that when the players are learning about the origins of Christmas, or at least trying to, they never even once mention anything about Christianity or the birth of Jesus. Get this, they actually say that Christmas began as a pagan holiday. Really? You had to stiff our savior like that show? I mean, he died for our sins, for heaven's sake. Action-wise, it's mostly just the climax.
I mean, you ain't wrong. It was a pagan holiday. We just Christianized it, you know? Funnily enough, yeah. It actually is true. So, I couldn't give him points for not going like the Christian route, which, let's be real, I don't think the Spriggers would have figured that out, you know? Just saying. Like, think about it. Try to explain that to them while doing Christianity. Like, at that point, I'd be like, old time. I mean, hey, gotta give him credit. He went that route.
Max that sticks out, but it sticks out alright. Sure enough, Andreas tracks down Anne due to her not-so-low profile at the Christmas parade and proceeds to possess the extremely uncanny Valley Santa float model to finish off the Boon Choys and Planters.
Oh, hello, Anne Boon Choy.
Santa? Andreas is Santa?
This holiday just keeps getting weirder.
And we get an epic chase scene that's comedic, action-packed, and gives a very slight Ghostbuster Marshmallow Man vibe.
And it
that,
does.
of course, the citizens of LA think is all just part of the act. It's all topped off with Sprig finding that sometimes the very best and meaningful presents are the ones that you personally make yourselves. It may not have been directly about the show's overall theme of accepting change, but it does a great job at conveying its own message about how the holidays really are about giving, be it up your dreams, the risk of your life, or just the humblest little gifts imaginable, all proving that Christmas is indeed
Our special time of year.
Right. Number 5?
Number 5. The First Temple. As you probably guessed by the title, we're backtracking things to the first episode that features one of the 3 temples that the gang goes to recharge the stones.
Oh boy.
And while all 3 temple episodes are really good and thought-provoking, this was definitely my favorite, not just because it's the only double-length episode, but for also having the decency to acknowledge that, even with a series as pro-change as this, change is indeed pretty hard to accept sometimes, especially when it comes to letting go of a grudge against someone. Okay, so, more exposition. So near the end of Season 1, Hot Pop, for reasons then unknown, buried the music box in the backyard and lied to Anne saying that he'd sent it to contacts for investigation. And when Anne finds this out mid-season 2, she's understandably pissed as hell. Especially since the music box has now gone missing. Not even working together to save Sprig and Polly's lives, or even the box itself was enough to rekindle that broken trust. But just when she's set to leave that slimy old traitor for good, he reveals that ever since he failed to save Sprig and Polly's parents from becoming the dinner of some monster herons, he'd vowed he'd never let anything happen to them, hence why he's so wary and overprotective. And got scared when he learned the box was dangerous and was determined to keep it out of sight and mind. But acknowledges what he did was indeed wrong and breaks down begging Anne for forgiveness. And even though she says she does, this episode shows that letting go of a grudge is easier said than done. And unfortunately, that's not the best time when you're in a temple with your life at stake. So, just for some more context, each temple's theme represents a main trait of each of the 3 main girls, that being intelligence for Marcy in this case, and kindness and bravery for Anne and Sasha respectively. Insert Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion reference here. And again, each temple episode is really well made, but not only does being double length allow for more time to pan out the action drama in the 3 trials the gang has to endure, but they're noticeably more creative and memorable with this temple than the other 2. Which I guess fits with this temple's theme of intelligence. We got a room that's a literal Rubik's Cube that the door can only be opened by solving said cube via a miniature version of it.
Which has
comedically painful results for Anne and the planters. There's also a room that looks like a disco floor at first glance, but is actually a booby-trapped death room, which I guess proved that disco is indeed dead. With a pretty clever riddle to the only safe color.
A dangerous room. What to do? Don't be jealous of my hue. It's a reference to green, the color of envy.
I have a lot of green friends who would find that offensive.
I see now why this temple's theme is intelligence, because this episode has such intelligent writing, and it's all topped off by showing that the writers had to have been fans of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, as the final obstacle is the characters as pawns in a life-size life or death game of chess, or rather, Amphibia's version of it, Flipboard. Either way, obvious Harry Potter reference, and as a Potter fan, I say kudos. But of course, in addition to the epic action, we got the emotional side of the story with Anne having trouble letting go of her grudge.
Let it go, let it go.
She really does try to hide it at first, just initially being super awkward and uncomfortable around the old frog, but by the time she's not even willing to let him risk her life for her by testing the other green tile to make sure it's safe, well...
I care about you too, Anne.
I mean, to an extent, right? You kind of proved that when you buried the music box. When push came to shove, you made a choice. It's fine, but let's stop pretending I'm part of the family, okay?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that if you're not willing to allow or appreciate someone risking their own life for you, then you've still got beef with them. Anne even flat out tells Hop Pop that she thinks she was too quick to forgive him, and even though there's a fun reference to SpongeBob with the time card, the drama here is still pretty intense. It all leads up to a really dramatic moment where finding out that not only does the rival Flipboard team not play fair, and also is a total show-off about it. Anne, who is forced against her will to play for the enemy team, is magically manipulated into beating the crap out of Hop Pop, which he thinks she actually enjoys. And finally, when he says he'll do literally anything for her to let this go, she finally admits to him what that thing is.
They don't know! I just need time. Look, I want things to go back to the way they were, but...
I'm sorry, Anne. You take all the time you need. Maybe it's enough to admit we've still got issues, instead of pretending they don't exist.
You know what? That's really awesome.
There you go.
As much as the show promotes change, it does still acknowledge that sometimes you just can't force folks into it, and they just have to come to grips with it over time, or more accurately in Anne's case, just let all their hurt out until it's all gone. That's a pretty mature message for a family show. But we do get some healthy change with Marcy, as for the first time in the series, she overcomes her impulsiveness, realizing that winning isn't worth her friends getting horribly maimed like this, and decides to forfeit the match, even though it means she won't get a second shot at returning to the temple. But thankfully, it turns out that's just what the temple was testing by its cheating, namely when you're smart enough to know that sometimes you gotta humble yourself and admit defeat if venturing forward is at the expense of those you love. And this recharges the stone, and makes Marcy's eyes glow for some reason. With a combination of epic action, creative obstacles, and some epic emotional drama, this episode shows that like recharging a magical gem, making a change of letting go of a grudge is pretty damn hard to do, but with time and patience, it's not impossible.
Anyway, FBI coming in number 4.
Escape to Amphibia. Remember how I mentioned in addition to Andreas, the government was also after the Boone Choice implanters? Well, here's some more info to that regard. Despite the planners' best efforts being conspicuous, the head of ET Government Investigations, Mr. X... no, not that
you, Mr.
one.
X. Thanks, Bill.
I'm surprised you still even remember that lame Incredibles ripoff. And his partner Ginny soon begin to suspect that said family are not the humans they claim to be, and keep trying to expose/capture them. but not much more success than Walter Combluth exposing
Also, is
Madison
that-
as a mermaid
that
in
RuPaul?
Splash. But the planner's luck eventually runs out, and he's able to prove them for the humanoid talking frogs they really are. They're taken Area 51 for interrogation and dissection. But not if the Boon Choice and almost every new character that's been introduced this season can help it. Yeah, Season 3 has a lot of new faces. I've already mentioned Dr. Jan and Allie and Jess, but there's also an elderly actor Hot Pop gave his big Hollywood break to called Humphrey, this geeky lab assistant called Terry, a girl named Mary Jo who Sprig befriended while acting as a frog-themed Spider-Man knockoff, and more. So yeah, as you've probably picked up, this subplot of Season 3 naturally is a big shout out to those 1980s movies where the government is pursuing an alien or other supernatural being that the everyman human protagonist is trying to help protect. Well, okay, I know this premise isn't exclusive to the 80s, but that did seem to be where it was the most prevalent. You all know what I'm talking about. E.T., Splash, Starman, Flight of the Navigator, Firestarter. Maybe. Hell, Season 1 of Stranger Things is also a big homage to those movies as well. And this particular episode is a homage to the parts in these movies where the supernatural being gets captured by the government and the protagonists and their friends have to rescue them. And trust me, if you love the invigorating action these scenes often entail, you might want to look somewhere else. There's not much of that here. No, this episode's strength actually lies more in its heart. Like, not just the fact that all these characters are relatively accepting of the fact that the planners are really talking frogs, but none of them hesitate for a split second to help the Boon Choice with rescuing said family, even if they all could very well go to prison for life. Okay, the Boon Choice I get, but all these people who barely know the planners? Talk about loyalty. And a good first impression. Actually, you know what? It's also pretty sweet that Anne's parents are so willing to help as well. When they first met the planners when Anne returned to Earth, they were initially all set to call the government on the planters. By the way, I was actually expecting this to be a foreshadowing of how they'd betray Anne and actually do this later in the season. But instead, they don't hesitate for one split second to go after the feds who have just captured the planners and drive after them with the ferocity and determination that anyone would have when pursuing the bastards who have kidnapped your family. Really shows how much they've grown throughout the season and have gone from finding the planners as just well-meaning nuisances to true family now. Never should have doubted you for a second, Boon Choice. And before we go into where the major heart and emotion of this episode lies, let's talk about the other big strength of this episode, the comedy. Especially from Mr. X. Yes, this is the typical high-ranking government agent or scientist archetype that's the head honcho of the operation of capturing the supernatural beings for experiments, glory, or just out of xenophobia, and there have been a shit ton of memorable portrayals of this character in movies and TV before, including in some of the ones I've mentioned already, but this portrayal is atypical to say the least. Basically, he's an animated caricature of his voice actor, comedian, and drag star RuPaul. So instead of being intimidating or brutish, he's portrayed as delightfully flamboyant and over the top.
What do you know about these amphibious extraterrestrials?
Who can say? Maybe a lot, maybe nothing.
Don't be coy, X.
Sorry, coy is my default setting.
Though he's also pretty funny when he's annoyed, such as when he's interrogating the planters.
What's your master plan?
To eliminate my enemies and take over the world!
Tell me more.
There's Duckweed, Buck, Gary, Tritonio, Barry, Gunther, Lucy, Nellie, Clifford, Lacey, Hartford.
Enough!
But even though he's not the slightest intimidating, that doesn't mean he's not a legit threat. Like, he actually manages to dupe the heroes into a trap with the very same frogs that they used to humiliate him while avoiding his capture earlier.
Payback stings, doesn't it?
And when he's thrown most of them in the brig, he's pretty sadistically condescending towards the fact that Anne's just a kid, and at a pretty inopportune time as well. See, around the start of this episode, it was finally just starting to sink into Anne that she would once again be leaving her parents whom she'd only just gone home to, and this is putting her in a gray area. And Sprig really deserves credit for saying earlier in the episode that even if their portal was finished earlier, he wouldn't mind waiting a couple days for Anne to say her proper goodbyes to them. That is what I call a true friend. And when Anne, who finally opens up with her parents about how she's been feeling...
How am I supposed to save my friends? Beat the FBI? Defeat King Andreas? If I can't even bring myself to say goodbye to my parents.
Her parents recap all the awesome things she's done throughout the season to prove her wrong and remind her that they'll always be in her heart. And this gives her the strength to take on multiple government agents with just a toy lightsaber. How awesome is that? So I think this episode's message about change is realizing when and how you've changed yourself, not feeling like you've done much with your life. Look over all you've done and really consider if that's truly the case. You may be surprised with how much you've grown with time. Hell, just when it seems like it's all over for the gang once they've escaped, when it's discovered that no Earth power is strong enough to fuel the portal and the feds have finally caught up to them, Anne uses her superpowers to charge the portal herself and neutralize X and his agents long enough for she and the planters to escape. Oh yeah, did I not mention those superpowers Anne acquired? Well, now that we've gone through this very humorous and heartfelt episode about the importance of realizing change, let's now look at the episode where she actually gets those powers.
Here we go. Number 3.
Number 3. True Colors. Oh boy, this is a heavy episode.
Here we go.
Hell, they literally have a content advisory warning
scene
at the beginning in Sprig's voice. At first I thought it was just kind of a joke, like how they start out the early Treehouse of Horror segments on The Simpsons. But then looking back at how they did the same for Treehouse of Horror 5, I probably should have taken that warning a bit more seriously here. But boy, this is still a damn good episode. Okay, so once again, we're backtracking things, namely to when it's time to return the box to Andreas so he can use it to send the girls home, but like said before, Sasha and Grimes have other plans, namely to overthrow Amphibia, imprison King Andreas in the dungeon, as well as Anne and the others when she refuses to support her dictatorship. And of course, when Anne rescues Andreas and defeats Sasha and Grimes, Andreas reveals that he's not the sweet Santa Claus-like ruler he seems, but rather a power-mad Newt version of Hitler who wants the box to travel across and conquer all other alternate dimensions, including Earth. So he reveals he can't send them home just yet and risk them warning Earth of the upcoming invasion. So yeah, this episode is definitely heavy.
Weight has nothing to do with it.
Well, maybe not literally, since the box can make King Andreas' castle fly, but emotionally, it weighs more than a pyramid of elephants, such as with the battle scenes. While they're still family-friendly, well, for the most part, which we'll come back to, they're all brilliantly animated and capture as much intensity and vigor as a Peter Jackson fantasy fighting scene, especially when Anne discovers her superpowers, how will be revealed in a bit, and beats the living shit out of King Andreas with them. Seriously, this is some of the most fluid animation, not just for the show, but also for television in general.
Let's see this from Disney.
Korean animators sometimes make the Night-Old Men look like animators of food fights, but it's not just the animation of the battle scenes, but just the animation in general here that's awesome. All of the expressions are insanely layered and detailed, perfectly capturing all the actors' stellar performances. But of course, execution of emotion can only offer so much with the content of the emotion itself. And yeah, said content is indeed every bit as good as its execution. But before we get into the bigger examples, let's start with the less spoilerific ones, like Anne and Sasha's interactions. Sasha, being her entitled self, thinks Anne and Marcy won't give a shit about her lying to their faces yet again, but Anne will have none of that. Not this time.
I'm done listening to you. I'm done trusting you. You're a horrible person, and I am done being friends with you.
After seeing Anne pretty much be a Smithers to this toxic and manipulative girl throughout the show, to the point of literally committing crimes, it's so awesome to see her finally grow a spine and stand up to her. Plus, in a bit of clever dramatic irony, Sasha and Grimes discover Andreas' true nature from a castle mural and realize that if Anne thwarts their invasion plans by shutting the gates on their upcoming army, not only will Amphibia become a dystopia even more horrible than the ones they were planning, but so will all other existing universes. But instead of taking a picture of the mural with her phone for proof for Anne like a smart person would, Sasha literally thinks Anne will just take her word for it when she tries to warn her, which, big shock, she does not. And you can really feel Sasha's hurt as she's experiencing the consequences of what happens when you cry wolf one too many times, and when you just be a bad friend in general. But as you've probably guessed by now, Sasha and Andreas aren't the only ones who haven't been totally honest about their true intentions, besides Hot Pop. No, as you probably guessed now, Marcy's not so innocent in all this either, but just listen to how so.
Did it ever occur to you, Anne, Sasha, that one of you knew more than she was letting on? That one of you might have gotten you stranded in Amphibia on purpose.
Marcy.
Yep, it turns out that Marcy actually discovered the magic of the Calamity Box prior to them being sent to Amphibia, and when she learned from her parents that they'd be moving out of state soon, Marcy was devastated, thinking that such a massive change would certainly mean the end of her friendship with Sasha and Anne. Yeah, never mind this age of texting, cell phones, and virtual Skyping and all that. No, change alone is doomed for their relationship. So once she discovered the Calamity Box coincidentally happened to be at a thrift store in LA, She decided then and there to run away via the box and basically kidnap Sasha and Anne so they'd never be separated. And once Anne's stone charging quest began, Andrea sweet-talked Marcy into participating, promising that he wouldn't actually send them back to Earth, but instead would take them on great adventures exploring the multiverse with him, where the three of them could stay together always, leaving out the part that the exploring would also entail conquering and countless gruesome deaths. Anne and Sasha don't think that's a good excuse, and boy does a lot more crazy shit happen from there, from Andrea's crushing Polly's new robot friend when he tries to save her.
Hey there, have you heard about my robot friend?
No, not Osimo, this is Frobo. Polly avoiding the same fate by finally growing her legs and getting the box, and Andreas breaking his promise to not throw Sprig to his death if they return the box to him, and as devastated and Hot Pop and Polly are, Anne is just...
Snaps.
Again, this is best animated feature-worthy animation. Yes, of course it's a fake out and Sprig gets saved, obviously, but seeing Anne be this torn up is actually really admirable and kind of reassuring, to be honest. See, the only major thing I feel is a downgrade from the first season with the remaining two is that it doesn't focus as much on Anne and Sprig's friendship, especially when Anne's reunited with Sasha and Marcy, at which point Sprig becomes, at best, a major supporting character. Even though there are still a few episodes that focus on their bond afterwards, Anne's relationship with Sprig honestly doesn't seem much more special than with Hot Pop or Polly. This one moment where she's falling over his supposed death and remembering all the fun they've had is very sweet because, in all honesty, Sprig really was a much better friend to Anne than Sasha or Marcy. Sure, Sprig is fairly immature and doesn't always get along with Anne, but he treats Anne like a real friend, not manipulating her like Sasha or being a constant and unappreciative burden to her like Marcy. And this devastation is what unlocks Anne's superpowers. Okay, so to make a long story short, there was some sort of Narnia-like prophecy that said the three human girls would thwart Andreas once they came to Amphibia and they unlocked the powers they had there. But recharging the stones actually drained them of their powers unknown to them at the time. But Anne didn't fully recharge hers since she thought her friends were in danger and cut the charging short. So she still has a bit of her powers left, they just last very briefly and are physically draining to her afterwards. But anyway, Marcy redeems herself by saving Sprig and also opening the portal for the gang to get home, but Sasha doesn't make it with them because she tries to hold back Andreas, and Marcy...
I just need to... I'm sorry for everything. Marcy!
God, no wonder they put a content advisory at the beginning of this episode. I hear that Disney was initially reluctant to include this scene, fearing that it would indeed be too scary for younger viewers, but creator Matt Braley offered a compromise by teasing the Season 3 intro at the end, which showed that Marcy was still alive to give kids a peace of mind. With invigorating action, stellar character animation, a brilliant plot twist, and pushing the envelope big time for Disney, it's hard to think of another Disney series that has such an epic and emotional Season 2 finale. Twin shows don't count.
Alright, number 2.
Number 2.
We're having that Spider-Man ripoff now.
All In / The Hardest Thing. This is the 2-part series finale, part 1 on Earth and part 2 in Amphibia, and it's no Owl House finale, but it's still pretty damn good, especially if you love anime. Okay, so once again the planters have made it back to Amphibia after escaping Mr. X and his cronies. They find it in a state of ruin thanks to Andreas' reign, but Sasha and Grimes have formed a resistance from the citizens of Wartwood, and the remainder of the season is mostly them just looking for new recruits, prepping for battle, and attempting to rescue Marcy. But once again, Anne failed to learn from last time not to fall for an obvious trap. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, more exposition.
There we go.
Andreas actually isn't the overarching villain of the series per se. That's actually the core, this terrifying mind hive composed of Newtopia's most intelligent and ruthless minds, including Andreas' very own father.
Yikes.
So to make a real long story short, about 1,000 years ago, Andreas used to be a sweet and trusting awkward kid who had a dickish power-mad father who warned him that friendships made you weak, and hoped that their upcoming invasion of Earth and its resources via the music box would man him up. But one of Andreas' 2 besties, Leaf, predicted shit hitting the fan for Amphibia with the box, and once trying to talk sense into the king failed, she had to resort to betraying Andreas and stealing the key in the box from him, this betrayal being what hardened him into the ruthless tyrant he is today, and vowed he'd redeem himself by reclaiming the box and finishing what his father wanted to start. And then the series happened.
Yep.
Oh, did I mention that the core is currently using Marcy as its host?
Jeez, that's
yeah,
messed up.
I probably should have mentioned all this before, I just couldn't find a way to naturally work it in. Well, at any rate, it's up to our gang to save Earth in part 1 and Amphibia in part 2. First, let's talk about the action.
Right, Earth time.
While not quite on par with True Colors, it is still pretty epic, especially if you're an anime fan. Trust me, the final battle between the girls and the core in the series finale, Osamu Tezuka probably had tears of joy watching this from heaven. Plus, now that Anne's parents have finally talked sense into Mr. X and the government, they're now able to switch from satirizing government agents in 1980s alien movies to government agents in 1950s alien movies, namely working alongside the heroes to fight the monsters/aliens with all the artillery their military has. Unfortunately, to not much more success than in those movies. Oh, and these episodes definitely continue to follow the path of True Colors of pushing the limits of what a Disney Channel show can get away with. But the bigger strength of these two episodes is easily the emotion and heart. For starters, we got the planners standing up to and fighting the very parents who killed Spriggan and Polly's parents, and Sasha ignoring the core's mind games of how she's still a bad person. But there's also Marcy finally growing up. While the core has her locked in a mind prison while borrowing her body, it decides to keep Marcy preoccupied Lotus Flower style and give her a Studio Ghibli-like fantasy world to explore along with Sasha and Anne. Only unbeknownst to her, these are clones of Sasha and Anne who have all her interests and mannerisms. Yeah, one thing I kind of forgot to mention is, even though Sasha and Anne were always very close with Marcy, they were pretty dismissive and borderline mocking towards her interests in fantasy and anime, which thankfully they do realize when they're discussing whether or not to forgive Marcy, and pointing out that maybe them completely ignoring her interests was partially what pushed Marcy to go through with what she did. But Marcy soon discovers that having friends who exclusively want what you want isn't as meaningful as she thought, making her realize that 1, she shouldn't force her interests on her friends, or forcibly kidnap them into those interests, and 2, even if she will be separated from them, she still shouldn't hide from change in this fantasy of hers that isn't what she expected.
I started this whole mess because I wanted to escape that reality. But I won't run away from it anymore.
But now let's talk a bit more about Andreas. As you may have picked up by now, despite its noticeable similarities to Emperor Bellos, actually being centuries old, being a villain largely because a loved one betrayed him, ruling the fantasy world as a supposedly wise and good-hearted king, but turned out to be a cruel, manipulative bastard the whole time, etc. Andreas actually isn't pure evil like Bellos. It's pretty clear from the beginning that he actually does have a small conscience. Hell, even if he was manipulating her, he really did like Marcy as a person. Hell, his manipulation scheme of her was in part because the core was planning to kill her to prevent the prophecy, whereas he convinced it to spare her by letting him manipulate her and her friends into recharging the stones for them. And this comes into play when, even though it looks like Anne's power is finally depleted and the Earth is doomed, Sprig discovers that a seemingly pointless red piece of paper he found back in Amphibia was a note to Andreas from Leaf written in invisible ink, basically saying that she's so sorry that she betrayed him, but to not close himself off from others and not trust anyone because of this big scary change that happened to him in his life, because she almost did the same thing after going on the lam and almost missed out on her awesome family that she now has.
We spend our lives afraid of change, but after many years I realized the beauty of life is the change.
And upon realizing that change hadn't caused Leaf to forget about him like he thought, he takes these words to heart and basically surrenders. And after Sasha, Anna, and the no longer possessed Marcy reconcile, the 3 girls head back to Amphibia to finish the job, with Marcy and Sasha regaining their powers previously drained from them by the stone. And again, anime lovers, you are gonna love this scene with a passion. But when it looks like it's all a bit too much, Anne decides to take the advice of the Stone Guardian and use the powers of all 3 stones to defeat the core once and for all, even when knowing it will cost her her life. And I know what you're thinking. Yeah, she's gonna come back, so what? Well, that actually may not be true.
Oh?
What I mean is, once she wakes up in what I think is purgatory, she asks the Guardian of the Multiverse what happened, and this is his response.
I made a copy of you right before you expired. A backup, if you will.
Well, that's gonna cause some serious existential dread later on.
Okay, I am
99%
sure
dead,
that what he
just
meant
a
was
copy
that
now?
he just transferred her soul into a new copy of her body, but leaving the 1% chance that this is not really Anne Boonchoi, it's just some carbon copy clone is just... I'm
weird.
Sorry, souls are not like computer files. Making backups of them doesn't mean they're the same person, even if they have all their memories. They're just, well, a clone. Jeez, you love anime so much, show. Astro Boy made that message very clear. But again, I'm sure the whole soul transfer thing is what they meant. Anyway, once Anne politely declines this offer to take over as Guardian of the Multiverse, she returns home to a joyous reunion. Only thing is, Anne using the powers of all 3 stones has drained them to the bare bit of magic they have left, so this means they won't be able to return to Amphibia after going home. I know it may seem harsh, but I really do think this was needed to showcase the show's message of change. And to that end, Marcy does still end up moving away, and after that, the three friends kind of lost touch. But that does not mean they forgot about each other, even after 10 years. No, when they have a reunion, they're simply overjoyed to see each other. And once more, Anne definitely never forgot Sprig, nor did he forget her. With such a beautifully bittersweet finale that brilliantly showcases the show's message with only a couple small issues, I bet you're wondering what episode could possibly top that for me. Well,
let's
let me
find out.
tell you.
Number 1.
And the number 1 episode of Amphibia is... Commander Anne. Now, I'm sure a lot of you who are familiar with this show already are pretty freaking surprised that this is my favorite episode. And it's that way for one very simple reason. It's not the funniest episode, it's not the most action-packed episode, but it's the most heartfelt episode because this is the episode that proved that Sasha actually had changed for the better this time. It gave probably the best examination on change in the show. So as mentioned earlier, Anne the Planner found that Sasha had started a resistance since they'd been away that happened to be headquartered in the Planner's basement. Anne and Sasha reconcile, and even though things are going brilliantly with Sasha in charge, Sasha's adamant that Anne be their new leader, though she doesn't give a clear reason for this beyond,
"It's complicated."
And despite her best efforts, Anne is an absolutely horrendous commander, and pretty soon everyone, including Anne herself, is desperate for Sasha to be in charge again. But even though it's painfully obvious that she should be at the helm, she still refuses for some reason. Okay, so before we go more into why I love this episode so much, the comedy and action here, while far from the best in the series, do still deserve mention.
Anyone got any hand sanitizer? I never noticed how dirty Amphibia was.
Wow, Earth made you three soft.
The scene of Anne failing miserably at being commander is also pretty freaking funny, and even has a brief shout out to Ratatouille. And the action is decent, if very little to talk about. But okay, let's get into my personal favorite moment in the show. When Anne is pleading with Sasha to take the helmet back and she still refuses, Anne actually starts to wonder if this is yet another manipulation tactic of hers, namely to ruin her credibility with Hortwood. But then Sasha says the real reason.
Because the last time I was in charge, I ruined our friendship.
And with that moment, it was made pretty clear that Sasha had seen the light and was willing to make a change that would be detrimental to their mission for the sake of fixing a broken friendship. I love how this is not only the all-time high for Sasha's character development, but I also love how this episode teaches that sometimes change isn't always the answer to make things right. Which again, much as the show loves advocating its message, it does have the humility to flat out say that sometimes change isn't always the answer. And Anne proves this to Sasha by letting herself get eaten, thus forcing her to rescue her and the others. After which, even after everyone unanimously wants Sasha back in charge, she still initially won't do it, saying she doesn't deserve such an honor. But Anne points out that her new humility has more than made up for her past actions, and that, much as she loves the gesture for this selfless change, it's not one she can take her up on. But even then, Sasha promises that this will be a partnership, not a dictatorship. And that's why I consider this the best episode, giving us not only Sasha's true redemption, but also by the show being just as humble as Sasha here, by admitting that even its message is not always the right approach to things, making for, in my opinion, the show's best episode with nothing to lose at.
Uh-oh, Anne, did you lose a shoe?
Oh, you've got to be kidding me!
Again!
Hey guys, this is the folks for Easter. Say hi to the folks.
Hey-o!
Hi! Well, that's all I got for Amphibia, guys. So what's next for me, I wonder? Well, in light of certain events going on in the film industry lately, I've decided that my ranking of the Wallace and Gromit movies is gonna have to wait a bit, in favor of a collaboration with Thomas Murray and I, comparing two movies regarding the importance of integration in film and TV. Speaking of which, why don't you give them a hint to what that is, Thomas?
Hope you're ready to get your dancing shoes on, because we got ourselves a trip to Baltimore.
So we'll be seeing you soon
like
on
I'm
the
Link.
Corny Collins Show. So for now, play us out, Rachel Zegler.
Are you kidding me?
Well, to be fair, what do you expect when you lose her? Like, anything is instantly cancelled. Yeah, I'd expected that to happen. Like, really? Let me know. How do you think we should get him back, huh? Gotta talk about Joanne to make sure it's not too crazy, you know? I'm just saying, you know where this goes. He asks me to go fly away, I gotta get him back. Well, anyway, you know the drill. Anyway, I'll see you guys for the hairspray countdown. Adios.